The PRovoke Podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Hello everyone and welcome to the PRovoke Media podcast, which we are doing in conjunction with the Asia Pacific Association of Communication Directors today, and also with Rudafin Asia, because we are talking about the Asia Pacific Communications Index, which is an annual study of more than 120 senior in-house communications executives. It takes place every year. This study actually took place in the third quarter of 2022. Some really interesting findings in terms of what in-house communications leaders are thinking, in terms of their spending plans, their expectations, their budgets, and even their ideas in terms of where their careers might end up. So we'll talk through some of the really interesting findings here, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Sylvia Cho Evans, who's Global Head of Communications at Vistra, and also Rudafin Asia Executive Vice President Charles Lankester. Sylvia and Charles, welcome to you both.
Thank you, Arun. Great
Hi,
to be
Arun.
here.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Good.
It's a lovely day here in Hong Kong, and can I just say it's so nice to be able to do a podcast in person, because I'm so used to doing
No masks.
No masks.
No masks.
Yes, well, we can only hope that will maybe become a bigger story in a couple of weeks' time. Soon, we hope. But you know, Hong Kong is a unique place. We have to remind ourselves of this as well. So anyway, let's talk through some of these CommsIndex findings, because I think they are fascinating. Obviously, we launched this with APACD, with Rudafin in 2021, conducted the study again in 2022 and found some fascinating insights. So let's start here. More than 7 in 10 of the comms leaders we polled described the perceived value of the communications function as extremely valuable or very valuable, which is, I think, good news. We can all agree. But crucially, 79% do not expect this value to decline as their organizations emerge from the pandemic. And I think this is interesting because one of the things I suspect we all saw during the pandemic is the value of the in-house communications function and corporate communications more broadly, I think became very clear during the pandemic because of all of the reasons I think that were tied up in this kind of global crisis. You had employees that needed to be reassured. You had customers that perhaps needed, some fun in their lives. You had regulators that needed to be kept engaged. There were healthcare concerns. So many big communications challenges. The question always was, will these benefits persist beyond the pandemic? Charles, you're a veteran crisis communicator. You will know that the crisis function is never more valuable than in a crisis. But does that persist beyond the crisis? 79% of our respondents suggest it will. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, whether you agree with that finding and whether you're seeing it in your day-to-day work. Charles, perhaps I can start with you.
We do see it continuing. Anecdotally, the people I talk to, certainly on the consultancy side and on the client side, indicate that budgets are getting stronger, requirements are getting stronger. We had our largest ever revenue year in 2022. 2023 is also looking very robust, even at this early stage. I think the COVID environment introduced a lot of quite novel opportunities, if that's the right word, certainly for us. Example, we work with a lot of hotel clients around the world, and they required complete reworking of their crisis communications as they sort of had to deal with COVID cases amongst guests and staff. So that's just one example, but all indicators are that communications was put in the spotlight like never before. And I think anecdotally, certainly from the Rudafin point of view, is that we were on centre stage and we delivered. And I think there is now more expected of us. And I'll be fascinated to hear from the client side, but I believe the trends will continue for this year and well into the future.
Sylvia, do you see the same thing from your perspective in-house?
I definitely do. I mean, as an in-house communicator, the pandemic really provided a interesting and great opportunity, I think, for the function. Just for myself personally, I remember at the height of the pandemic when offices were closing down in Hong Kong and we were all scrambling, working from home. Have had a very good working relationship with our CEO, but we found ourselves having to find a place in North Point at a coffee shop with my laptop. What are we saying to our stakeholders? What are we telling our employees? What are we telling our clients? And it was just real time, like we were living live through a global crisis, solidifying messages. And I think through that real hands-on crisis mode, trust is built. You have to, trust is built, collaboration is built, and kind of all of a sudden, I mean, the in-house communication function was seen critical at, even before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic definitely elevated that. And I do see it continuing because that trust is built and that buy-in within the organization has been even further solidified during the pandemic. So I definitely see that continuing. It was a great opportunity for us in-house communicators to really step up. And in a time when there's so much uncertainty and everyone in your organization and in your networks around the world looking for information, looking for comfort, looking for facts, looking for some kind of guidance. And as communicators, whatever organization we're working for, we had to step up and try to provide that as much as possible with the limited information we also had, but try to provide some form of comfort and consistent messaging across the board. So it was a great opportunity, and I do see that carrying through.
I'm very curious, post-COVID, do you think within your organization, management looks at the function of communications differently?
I think so. In my personal experience, I do, because of that time, through those COVID years, we had to be at the forefront of what do we tell our clients, what do we tell our colleagues, what do we tell our partners and other stakeholders, and that has carried through. Now as we come out of the pandemic and we move towards kind of more BAU and different priorities and focus areas for the business, because you've developed that working relationship with the management team, definitely I think that carries through beyond that. I mean, personally for me, I've seen that.
And it's exactly the same here. I would say a different frame. Communications, I think, is now far more embedded. It was always there, but I think coming out of the pandemic, we're in a very different, and as far as we're concerned, a much more positive place.
I'm curious to know whether you both see it kind of moving upstream, I suppose. We've heard this so often in this industry that communications needs a seat at the table. Do you see that reflected, I suppose, in the kind of work that's being done by in-house communications functions?
Absolutely. I think again, coming out of pandemic, because we were involved at so many different layers and new layers, and I think the proximity to sort of senior management, C-suite, we've always been there, but it was such a turbulent period. And I think that Sylvia's point about messaging and actually speaking clearly and consistently with stakeholders was a function that proved of tremendous value. What we have always seen is leadership pay attention to comms when there's a problem. Now this is a bit of a truism, but it's proven time and time again that the one time you will get all the access you want to the chief executive is when the share price is collapsing or there is a significant problem. And I think what we're seeing coming out is a redefinition of communications generally, and looking at the consultancy side, it's some very, very strong businesses now. And what's, I think, interesting also is the amount of acquisition movement that is taking place. There's a lot of companies being acquired early into this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, you see now is coming out of the pandemic. There's a lot of research about how employees feel about the companies they work for, and really being part of whether it's a purpose-led organization or broader. It's more than just the paycheck I take home, but what kind of organization am I working for? And I think as communicators, that's a real opportunity to help your corporate narrative and to define kind of who you are as an organization. And I think that's a great opportunity for us in-house communicators to work with our executives. And if you have a management team and a CEO who really buys into and supports that type of work, then you're definitely right there with the CEO and the executive team to help drive that agenda. And seat at the table, I mean, for me personally, I have direct access to our CEO and executive leadership team, even though I may not, quote unquote, be a direct report. So for me, that's not important. It's mostly what access do I have? Am I involved in the key issues of the business and the key priorities? And if I do have that and have the ears of the right people so that we can get the right messages out, then that's what's important. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the, I think, challenges for the comms function when it comes to that kind of upstream value has traditionally been proving its effectiveness compared to other functions. And so this is a question, that's asked in the study. It's asked in many communication studies. How is the effectiveness of the communications budget or the public relations spend being measured? And I think the results from the CommsIndex, as you're both probably aware, are a little bit worrying, and we've seen that both years, 2021 and 2022. If anything, the most recent edition sees a higher proportion of respondents opting for media clippings, favorability / sentiment scores, and awareness metrics, all three of which are proxies rather than actual evidence of behavioral change or business outcomes. Advocacy metrics trail further behind, and they are ahead of harder evaluation options such as company financials and sales. So how worried should we be about this, Charles?
Sure. The numbers are the numbers, but the equal reality is that, certainly speaking for Rude and Finn, our fees have been growing year on year at record levels. So I would say there's somewhat of a disconnect here. So whatever we're doing right, there is a market for it. Having said that, I think generally it's still a source of intense disappointment for me that we're still bogged down in this ridiculous sort of clipping book mentality, and we still get briefs, which is how many clips do you expect? And it's frankly ludicrous, and I think that anyone who is still living in that world really does deserve to have their value challenged. I would say today 10% of what we do involves sending out press releases and chasing media coverage. The vast majority of what we do is corporate counsel, messaging. We do a lot of research. We're very active in film. We're very active in web. So we're really we're a far more, I would say, holistic communications function, right at the right upstream at the beginning. All that being said, I think it's actually terrific that the industry is getting a bit of a wake-up call. I do think that for an industry that professes to be creative, some of the creativity vacuum does exist in certain parts of our industry. And I won't name any names. The awards that we've received would indicate we're not in that category. But it just amazes me that even the language has been unchanged. So I think that if we're being challenged to show results, my call for anyone on the consultancy side is start every engagement with a mutual KPI that isn't clips, something more robust, something that is linked to business. And it's always argued that it's very difficult. It's not easy, but I would say our industry would have very different numbers a year from now if every piece of work that we did had a solid business metric and a business outcome as a validator. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for us, because the more value we demonstrate, the more contracts we win.
Do these findings surprise you, Sylvia?
Yes and no. I mean, I think historically that's been, as long as I've been in marketing and communications, it's clippings. But
That's a
I
good
mean,
name for a company.
Exactly, maybe clippings times 3. But I mean, I agree with you, Charles. I mean, how does traditional PR and clippings fit into a broader strategic marketing communications plan? And nowadays, when everything is so is digitally led, how does that fit into a digital campaign? Are we driving clients to our website? What's the engagement there? Are they clicking on the contact us form? Are they engaging with our sales colleagues? So it's very I think it's quite narrow of a focus to look at just those PR metrics, because there's so many other factors now than maybe decades ago where that's all we had to go by. But now they should all sync and work with each other in terms of all the different marketing and comms tactics to deliver a business metric. At the end of the day, a company is trying to sell more products, sell more services, win new clients. So how do what we do from a marketing and comm side deliver on that? Or maybe it's metrics like how are we doing on a recruitment standpoint, engaging our employees, getting more candidates through, to apply for our jobs. And I think there's broader ways to think about it, and definitely room for growth. I agree with you,
That's so interesting. I could not agree more. One of the biggest, I would say, aspects or the requests that we're getting is help with recruitment. And what can we do to attract talent? And that does not always involve a press release and a media interview. Then that is absolutely spot on.
And that is not that difficult to measure either, you would think, right? So,
and the opportunities are there to measure. It's just that we have to make a bit of an effort to go and find them. Recruitment is absolutely classic. And it gets more granular than that. We represent a large global financial services corporation. Since our sort of relationship with them, they have increased their global revenues by north of 45%. Now, can we take credit for all of that? Probably not 100%, but we have helped them sharpen up every single touch point, right down to how they present their business offering in client meetings. And every step of the way, we've repackaged it, re-engineered it, and as a net result, their business has grown. So I would say comms and marketing had a direct impact in how they go about their business.
Now, another finding, which is somewhat linked to the one we've just discussed, is when we asked in-house comms leaders whether PR firms are effective in measuring their value, or communications firms, however you describe them. 1/4, 23%, are unconvinced. Which is an improvement actually on the result in 2021. But the sizable majority, 67%, so 2/3, only see them as being somewhat effective in terms of proving value compared to 53% the year before. And only 1 in 10 are confident of PR firm effectiveness. So Sylvia, let me come to you first and get your take on that particular finding and whether you think it is a cause for concern at all.
It is a cause for concern because I see as in-house communicators, particularly those of us in Asia, where our comms teams are generally quite small and lean. We have to rely on our external partners to just sometimes get our work done. So I think the view that in-house communicators could do their jobs fully without external support is concerning.
Yeah. So just to jump in there, so that's another finding which kind of follows on as well, which is that 53% of respondents say they could do their jobs without external PR support, up from 44% last year, which is it's quite a confident response from the in-house respondents there.
So I mean, in terms of, why? I think everyone has probably very varying experiences with their external comm support. And my view of working with agencies and consultancies at the end of the day is who my day-to-day contact is at the consultancy firm, and do they understand the business, the work, the business I'm in, it's very niche, and do they understand that? Do they understand what we're trying to achieve from a business standpoint? And you know, we bring on board external consultants to, at the end of the day, help us make our lives easier because we don't have the capabilities in-house or the time and resources in-house to do them. So are they able to do that? And there has been times, you know, when you do work with a consultancy and you're like, oh, would it have been easier? Should I just have done it myself? And you know, maybe there's some of that has played into that result. But you know, so I don't, you know, maybe Charles, you can expand.
No, I mean,
Be careful what you wish for, Charles.
yeah, I was going to say, I'm just looking at these notes again, saying 1 in 10 are confident of PR firms' effectiveness. Hopefully that's Rue de Fin client speaking there. Look, I couldn't agree more. I think if we are in the very simple business of adding value, and I thought your comment, Sylvia, about would it have been faster to do it myself, when you have that kind of relationship, it isn't a good relationship. And you know, we always work to understand our clients' business as in depth as we're able. And an example being, we now try to embed colleagues in client offices wherever possible. So if the client relationship is significant enough, and we have a couple of colleagues as we speak who are not sitting in the office because they're working side by side with clients, what we then tend to find is the separation between consultancy and client almost goes away, because then the two organizations have commonality of, you know, colleagues sitting next door to clients, having lunch, understanding the business, seeing, you know, how the clients operate. I think that's where value is added. And I think another sort of consideration is we need to up our game a little bit as an industry. And I think, again, that observation, I could do it faster myself, I think that is, again, a bit of a wake-up call. We all know what the challenges are. These aren't new challenges. They've been there for many, many years. The industry, I believe, needs to be more realistic about how to add value, how to measure value. And if we achieve these things, and I'm not going to use I will use the term surprise and delight, I think that's something that we could also look at quite carefully, which is, we've got our program of work, but what can we do additionally? Now, example, we're not a media relations organization, but one client had a particular problem they wanted solving, and that problem we largely solved by getting a really brilliant article in a publication. And as a net result of that article, a business problem was avoided. In terms of adding value, we got a call very recently from a publicly traded company that was experiencing a short sell attack, not the one in the news at the moment. And we very quickly went over there. We sat in their boardroom. We listened to the problem. We turned around a communication strategy within 2 hours. And within 24 hours, their share price had largely recovered to what it was before the attack began. And they followed our advice word for word. Again, was it only communications that got us there? It was a mixture of things, but what we helped them do was focus their message, take a complex case and make it simple, and help get them organized. And by doing this, it gave great, I think, comfort to their stakeholders, and it showed leadership, which is vital in a crisis. And the market responded very positively. So what they lost post-Rue de Fin, they regained.
And I think that's a great opportunity, Charles, to get outside support like that is in a situation where the views that we don't necessarily have as in-house communicators is necessarily the pulse on the broader industry and market surrounding us. So to be able to provide that perspective and counsel and guidance, I think is critical, which is why we would, as in-house communicators, partner with an external agency to be our pulse on those types of scenarios.
Well, I think I think that's a really interesting observation, because by definition, if you are within the organisation, the colleagues that you're dealing with, especially if they're at the C-level, you rely on them for pay rises, promotions, and everyone's different. Personalities are different. So maybe there are things that you want to say that you would not but someone in-house would feel uncomfortable. I think that's a vital role of outside counsel, which is at the end of the day, if you don't like what we say, fire us. But most of the time clients don't. They actually ask for more because we can be very candid and we can actually share what we believe is the right thing to do. And let's be, again, be very transparent. In many cases, clients ask us, please help me make this happen, but the driver needs to be external, not internal. So we see that as a vital.
And I think that also maybe speaks to the whole notion of questioning the brief from the consultancy side as well. I think a lot of times, when we've had this debate about agency effectiveness and being able to demonstrate value, I often hear from agencies, yeah, but this is what clients want. They're just asking us for clippings, so we're just giving them what they want. And then you do kind of think, well, actually, no, maybe that's what the brief says. And maybe the brief also says you should do this and this, but surely if you're doing your job properly as outside counsel, you're there to question all of those assumptions. And I appreciate that can be difficult. Is that something that you find you do, or is it kind of something you have to perhaps be a little delicate?
I'm smiling to myself because there are certain clients that you can do that very effectively, others you can't. We always challenge the brief wherever possible. If it's very rare that we see something that is perfect. Do not wish to be arrogant, but in certain cases a client will ask for certain activities, services, which we know are too narrow or too limited. So we will always request an opportunity to interrogate the brief with our prospective client in advance, which most of the time people are quite happy to do, which then allows us to paint a slightly bigger canvas. And as mentioned earlier, I hope we're coming through the environment where the answer to every question is a press release. I genuinely believe we are, but certain clients it's absolutely not the case, and that's just what they want. And it's now a commodity product. We were asked to bid for some work the other day that the fee was laughable, and we very politely declined. But there is still a pervasive attitude out there in a small part that we're just a clipping industry, and that we all, I think, collectively need. I think largely we have moved on actually, and I'm very heartened by Sylvia's comments about the bigger picture. But I think it's beholden on all of us to challenge briefs.
Yeah, and is that something you look for as well in terms of outside counsel? Is there a way to do it in perhaps a manner that builds confidence without seeming like too oppositional?
Yeah, no, I appreciate if a vendor can challenge the brief, or that's part of the, I have an idea, I brief vendors all the time, so I want their perspective. How do we make the outcome ultimately better? So that collaboration and that conversation is critical, I think.
I think just to build on that, and that's great, heartening to hear. I think in many cases the concept of the brief is somewhat redundant.
Sure, yeah, and when I said brief, it really kind of stands in for the whole thing.
But where I think clients who are shopping for consultancy or agency services, something we've noticed recently, which is it's actually very empowering and makes the whole process more fun, is solve an actual business problem. So rather than the usual litany of we want this, shopping list, actually give us a business problem to solve. So it makes the whole process more interesting. And as we all know, these very large sort of RFPs, in 99% of the cases, they go in the bin straight after the firm is appointed, because we develop work for which there is absolutely no budget or often no interest, but the chemistry is really good and the relationship works in the room, thus we are appointed. That process would have been made much more efficient if companies gave, I think, consultancies bidding for their work just one problem to solve. How would you approach this? So credentials, tick, you can do the work, now solve the problem. And then look at how the 6 firms approach the problem solving. And that would be, in my opinion, a much better basis to make a buying decision.
No, I agree.
So I just want to talk about the primary responsibilities of the comms team before we get on to the job satisfaction findings. We have talked about media relations here already, but 99% selected that as so that comes out on top when we talk about primary responsibilities, ahead of corporate reputation, which also scores very high, as does crisis issues and social media and monitoring. It's the same top 5 as the previous year. Employee engagement has jumped a lot, which I think we would all expect. But areas like digital strategy, public affairs, brand activism are much lower. Do these, for you, Sylvia, does that perhaps reflect the right mix, or would you question that?
I personally would question it, just from personal experience. And what I find interesting, I think they're all quite interrelated now, kind of going back to my prior point about just integrated communications. And definitely I'm not surprised by the employee engagement. For sure, kind of internal comms employee engagement has been a huge part of my job remit over the past few years, as well as crisis issues. And we take a real holistic, integrated approach to how we do marketing and communications at my company. So social media is a key channel for us, and so and that's how we push out our brand messaging, our sales and services messaging. So for me, they are quite interrelated, and we try to engage our employees on social media, help them to be ambassadors for us, to get them to engage with our social media content, get them to do their own organic social media posts. So we do try to take a real holistic and integrated approach. So it's hard, these rankings, in terms of what's more important than others, because it depends also kind of time of year for the business.
Yeah.
During COVID, crisis issues high. Depending on what industry you're in, one might be more important than the other, but yeah.
Yeah, it depends a lot, I suppose, also type of business and the type of function within that business as well. But Charles, your thoughts?
I think we need a different question next year, actually. I mean, I think asking people to, these are closed questions, right? So, I'm thinking maybe what the way to ask a question slightly differently is leave it open. And I do agree with Sylvia. I think that if you were to put, level up a little bit, really it's reputation and risk. I think that's really the primary job that we have to manage. How to help a company strengthen its reputation, and how to help a company mitigate its risk. And as we've seen, when there is a proper problem, a really major crisis, all the communications function sort of focuses on that. In peacetime, then you have the opportunity to do more thought leadership, but at its sort of peak, I would say, or at its surface now, I think reputation and risk increasingly define the role of communications.
There is actually an open-ended element to this question. I'm not going to be able to find out what people. I do recall people putting in other answers, and I'll try and get those to you. But is there a concern at all that media relations is still number one, or is that just a fact of life that we? You said earlier that you don't do media relations.
What we do, but it's not all we do. It's
okay.
part of what we do. And look, absolutely, we would never say that we don't do that. But we now, if we're going to grow our business in the areas where we want to grow it, which is high value services, example, we're just in the process of rolling out our 23 executive skills, which is really, really terrific 3-hour workshops in media, presentation, negotiation and crisis. Very high value, and clients are queuing up. There's not any media relations in sight. Having said all of that, as we all know, a major story in a major global business media can affect a company's fortunes for the better or for the worse. And so we will always be in that business, but what we are doing around that is building many other businesses for which there is a very clear client demand.
And just quickly, Sylvia, do you see media relations as kind of your primary duty in your role?
It actually isn't. It's critical, and definitely during times of when certain issues bubble up within the business, it becomes extremely critical. But kind of when I come in day to day, I'm not sitting there thinking, are we in XYZ magazine, or are we, you know, it's important, but we're really focused on kind of employee engagement. How do we drive our overall brand message? And I like what you said. It really is reputation and risk. How do we enhance our reputation, protect our reputation through all the other
because
ways
these are
beyond media relations.
Right, exactly, and this is it's a tool. It's a channel, if you like. It's not actually a outcome.
That's spot on.
Yeah.
It's a channel.
Yeah.
An important channel,
important
but still
channel,
a channel.
sure.
Okay, so let's talk finally about job satisfaction on the in-house side. So more than a third of respondents are either neutral or unhappy in terms of job satisfaction. And more than 80% think they are remunerated either somewhat fairly to less than fair. So only 20% think that they are remunerated more than fairly. And more than half are more than moderately likely to search for a job in the next 90 days. Now, I've noticed a lot of movement on the in-house side, but it's hard to say whether it's kind of more than in previous eras. You do think perhaps the pandemic has had an impact. It's thrown people's travel plans and ideas of where they're going to live. Those have all been reshaped. We've seen that firsthand in Hong Kong. But Sylvia, let me come to you first. Do these findings surprise you at all?
Not necessarily. I'm trying to think back to how did I answer that question. But to be honest, I think in-house communicators were now kind of coming up for air over the past few years, and maybe part of that, the findings, is a result of people just being tired of having a couple years of going through a global pandemic with comms at the forefront of managing the messaging of that while trying to keep BAU communications and work going, with going back to really small teams, and now kind of coming out of all that thinking, okay, what next? And so in a way I do feel for myself, for in-house communicators, maybe we're all in a, okay, what does the future hold now? Like, will the function continue to stay elevated and the importance within an organization still remain? And will I continue to be involved in real strategic and interesting projects and have the voice and the ears of the right people within the organization? So, I think what's happened over the few years has been really interesting and sets up the function really well for real ongoing success. But I think maybe as in-house communicators, they're also kind of a wait and see what's to come. Also a bit of trying to catch some breath and re-energize after a really hectic past few years.
Sure, we won't ask you how you answered the question on whether you're likely to search for a job in the next 90 days. Charles, do you see increased movement, perhaps increased discontent on the in-house side?
Candidly, we don't. Now, obviously, we don't ask these sort of questions necessarily, but we have terrific relationships with our clients. The turnover has been negligible in that for the last 2 years. The people that we work with are still the people we work with. I think there's been an awful lot of introspection. I think people have been sitting at home, looking out of the window, thinking about life far more than possibly there was ever the time to do before. And anecdotally, if you look at some of the sort of LinkedIn sob stories that are out there about mental health and everything else, which of course must be taken seriously, but I think there is a lot of people are thinking slightly differently about the future and their purpose, and that's a big theme at the moment. I was speaking with a very well-known recruitment person recently who said the competition for talent, however, is at an all-time high. Companies are desperate for good quality people, either to replace people that have moved or because the function is growing and they need more resource. But I would say in one sentence, we haven't noticed a huge sort of change of the chessboard. but I couldn't say with my hand on my heart what all the chessboard is thinking. I do think people are approaching their careers slightly different.
Yeah, and I think both of those responses there's a lot of resonance there, I think, in terms of the observations you both made. One point I should make, which I didn't kind of flag earlier. We ask respondents, if you could reset your career and start with any career choice, would you still pursue communications? In 2021, actually, I don't know if you remember, Charles, we had quite a significant percentage of people who said no, they wouldn't. I think it was more than a third, and that's actually dropped to around a quarter. So that's promising. That's encouraging. I think we can take that as a win. Almost 75% say they would still pursue communications. They could start with any career choice, and I think maybe that's a good note on which to end. If you guys had any final thoughts, perhaps.
No, I would just say, I would stick with my choice too. So,
ditto. I think there are very few other careers that give you this roller coaster of tasks, responsibilities, opportunities to do interesting work, and it's been said before, but there is very, very few days are like the day before or the day after.
No 2 days are the same.
If you like being kept on your toes, I would say communications is a pretty good place to be.
Yes, indeed. And you come across a lot of interesting people as well, has been my observation too. So, Charles, Sylvia, thank you so much for your time today, and take care, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.